What's going on, guys? Welcome to Wicked and Wild, where we cover all types of true crime, whether solved or unsolved, terrifying and tragic, or just plain wicked and wild. I'm your host, Tyler, here to give you exactly what you came for. And with that being said, please like and subscribe for more weekly videos, and let's get right into it. The case that we're going over today is so disturbing and captivating that many people to this day think it's a work of Hollywood fiction, when in reality this is a real true crime case. Today we explore the haunting case of Daniel LaPlante, a name synonymous with darkness and dread. Prepare yourselves as we journey into a truly disturbed mind and the chilling events that unfolded in a quiet town. Daniel, a troubled teenager with a troubled past, possessed a darkness that truly consumed him. His unusual behavior and eerie fascination with the occult foreshadowed the sinister events that were about to unfold. It was a series of inexplicable and horrifying crimes that shook a community to its core. From stalking to burglary, and then ultimately to murder, Daniel LaPlante's actions ultimately left a trail of despair and horror, forever etching his name into the halls of true crime history. Teen sisters Tina and Karen Bowen lived in a small town with their father Frank and mother, whose name I could not find, in Pepperell, Massachusetts, and for the most part had a fairly normal and happy existence. That happy existence would unfortunately take a turn in 1986 when they would lose their mother abruptly to cancer, which really caught the family by surprise and really devastated the two young girls. Now a household of only one income, Frank started working longer hours to make ends meet, leaving the girls home alone more often, and with Tina being the older sibling at 15 years old, she was responsible for her younger sister Karen, who was 9. And like most 15-year-old girls, Tina had an interest in boys and wanted to start dating. So, when she began receiving telephone calls from an unknown teenage boy named Danny, she was understandably very excited. It's unclear how Danny was able to obtain Tina's phone number to begin with, but it likely wasn't ethical. Tina believed the story that Danny gave her, that he had obtained her number from a mutual friend who went to the same school as she did. Regardless of how Danny got Tina's number, she enjoyed talking to him, and Danny would go on to describe himself to her as tall, muscular, handsome, athletic, and even captain of his high school football team. He had likely stalked her to find out all of these details that she found attractive, and physically he couldn't be any further than how he had described, which Tina would soon realize. But Danny wanted to make sure he had secured a date with Tina. The pair would go on to chat every day for hours on the phone, with Tina telling Daniel all about her life. And after a couple weeks of talking every day, Danny tried to convince Tina to go with him to the fair, and she agreed, but was completely shocked when he showed up on her doorstep to pick her up. Instead of the athletic jock-type boys she was expecting, her blind date was a disheveled, greasy, dark-haired boy with no attractive features at all. It was too late for Tina to change her mind at this point, so she reluctantly went with him to the fair. They only stayed about an hour before Tina made every excuse in the book to get back home. It was during their date that Danny discovered that Tina and her sister had recently lost their mother to cancer, leaving only their father to care for them. Danny took great interest in the details of Tina's mother's death, much more interest than simple curiosity allowed for. He actually seemed like he was obsessed with the death of her mother, continually questioning her on how she felt at the moment she died, and how much she suffered. He would even bring it up in conversation even when they were talking about something completely different. When the date was over, Tina vowed to never see or speak with Danny again, but Danny made sure that wasn't the case. What he would do is not only completely bizarre, but beyond cruel. Tina and her little sister Karen really struggled with their mother's early death from cancer. The sisters had always been close, but they had become even more connected since their mother's death. One night when Tina was particularly missing her mother, she begged Karen to have a seance. She wanted to see if they could communicate with their mother's ghost. And reluctantly, Little Karen agreed, and the girls attempted their connection to the spirit world in their basement with an Ouija board. While they were both hopeful that they might connect with their mother's ghost, they knew that the likeliness of that happening was very low. And after trying to connect with the afterlife, asking question after question, and hoping for any kind of result, it ended in a quiet, uneventful seance. However, later that same evening, Karen and Tina received a rhythmic knocking against their bedroom walls as they slept. Amazingly, it appeared as though the girls' seance worked after all. In the dead of the night, the two girls spoke to the unseen force as though they were talking to their mother one more time. They asked the spirit questions, to which it replied with knocks against the wall. It seems that the girl had truly made contact, not just with the afterlife, but more importantly, their mother. This continued for several evenings until the knocking became so regular that it disturbed the girls' sleep. Over time, objects in the house began to disappear. Items which were laid out on a table one day would find themselves thrown across the floor the next. The girls would come home to find furniture moved from one side of the room to the other. Eventually, Karen and Tina believed that they were being haunted by an evil demon, not the spirit of their mother as they had originally so believed. And now, completely frightened, the sisters decided to tell their father, Frank, about the demon that they had unleashed by their seance while trying to contact their late mother. But Frank, being the adult he is, and understanding the trauma that comes with losing a parent, especially a mother at a young age, believed that it was the girls themselves doing this almost as a way of coping with their devastating loss, and were emotionally struggling with grief. One evening in January 1987, the strange knocking had started while Karen and Tina were alone in their room. At this point, the constant tapping had become so common that it was driving the girls insane. This particular evening, however, it seemed that the noises were not coming from the walls, but from the basement. After gathering the strength and arming themselves with a kitchen knife, the two girls slowly made their way towards the source of the noise. As they crept down below to the basement, they were greeted with a terrifying sight. Written in what seemed to be blood on the basement wall was the message, "I'm in your room. Come and find me." The girls fled the house without hesitation and immediately sought safety in a neighbor's house. They told their neighbor of what happened, and the neighbor assured them that they are safe now and will stay there until their father gets home from work. Upon their father coming home, they immediately met him and told him of what happened and the frightening message on the basement wall. Frank, again believing that it was his daughters who were causing all of this and making it up, now ordered Tina and Karen to undergo counseling to help them cope properly with the loss of their mother. Over the next several weeks, both the tapping and moving of objects seemed to have stopped and brought some peace back into the Bowen home. Then one day, as the girls were minding their own business, going about their lives, the girls heard the knocking sounds. But this time they came from behind Tina's bedroom wall. When the two girls entered, again they were met with a message written in blood on the wall, "I'm back. Find me if you can." The girls once again immediately left and ran to their neighbor's house, who agreed to let them stay there until their father again arrived home from work. Later, when seeing their father's car come down the road, they went straight outside to flag him down and tell him of the incident. At this point, Frank had had enough. He was convinced the girls were causing all of this in a weird way to cope with the loss. This time, Frank made a point for them to stay put, and he was going to go into the home from top to bottom to prove there was nobody, and certainly not any ghosts in the house, let alone ones defacing his own property. However, when Frank entered the house, he noticed that there had been further disarray than what his girls had previously claimed. The house was completely turned upside down. It was almost if the house had been ransacked, except nothing was missing and everything was on the floor. At that moment, it became apparent that someone had been inside the house when Frank and his daughters were all assembled in their neighbor's home. The house was completely destroyed to such a point that Frank knew his girls did not do this. Frank then slowly made his way into Tina's room, and there, an additional message had been painted on the wall. "Marry me." After reading the message, Frank had a feeling he was being watched. And there, on the other side of the room, Frank was greeted with an even more unnatural sight. A young boy stood dressed in the clothing of Frank's deceased wife. And if that didn't seem crazy and surprising enough, he was also wielding a hatchet. A struggle then ensued by Frank and this cross-dressed mystery man. But in an instant, the man was able to slip away and ran past Frank and seemingly vanished. Frank, standing there and totally dumbfounded by what he just saw, then started to process that this whole time there really had been someone in the house, and not just someone, but seemingly a crazy man wearing his deceased wife's clothing, makeup, and wielding weapons. Frank then ran to his neighbor's house where his daughters were waiting and called the cops to tell them about this mystery person who had disappeared inside his house. But when the cops came, the intruder was nowhere to be found. But how could this make sense? Frank couldn't understand how this person could vanish into thin air. Someone in the neighborhood surely would have seen a man in woman's clothing and a wig running away, but nothing. The cops told Frank to take his daughters and stay with relatives for a couple days, and they will constantly watch the house, which Frank happily agreed to. 2 days later, after staying with relatives, Frank stopped by his house to grab some items he needed. But as he came down the road, he saw a light in one of the windows had been left on. Frank thought to himself, "I knew the cops said they'd watch the house, but I didn't know that they would be inside the house." As he got closer, he could see this was not the police. He could clearly make out that this was a man yet again wearing a dress as the figure walked by the window. Frank quickly called the police, who seemed to surround the entire house within a minute, ensuring there was no way for this crazy man to escape. The situation took a dark turn as one of the officers entered the home, and immediately after opening the door, could see a knife plunge through a family picture on the wall with the writing, "I'm still here, come and find me." Across the room on the opposite wall, another knife through another family picture with the writing, "I'm going to kill you all." At this point, the situation became very serious, and police were determined to search everywhere to find this maniac. Just as officers were finishing searching the entire house, one officer in the basement noticed a large piece of wood behind the washer machine. When he went to move the washer, he was shocked how easily he was able to move it. And when he moved the wood, officers found right there 16-year-old Daniel LaPlante burrowed deep inside. The officers removed LaPlante from the crawl space and placed him under arrest. Once Daniel had been removed from the scene, officers conducted a thorough search of the Bowen residence. To their horror, they discovered that Daniel had been living inside of the walls of their home. The passageway which they discovered Daniel in had been tunneled around to other areas of the house. There was even a handful of peepholes dotted around so that he could observe Tina from whichever room she was in. It became clear that Daniel had been pretending all along to be the ghost of Tina and Karen's mother in order to torment them. It's believed that he was planning on revealing himself to the girls while dressed as their deceased mother. Whether to genuinely pass himself off as her spirit or whether to terrify them remains unknown. However, it was likely the latter. The fact he was wielding a hatchet at the time also suggests that Tina and Karen made a very lucky escape that night. And as for those bloody messages, thankfully, they had actually been written in ketchup. Daniel was arrested and charged with 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of armed assault in a dwelling, breaking and entering in a dwelling, larceny of more than $100, and malicious destruction of a property. He was only 16 at the time, so he was placed in a juvenile detention center. For whatever reason, the prosecution decided to charge him as an adult, which meant that he was also able to post bail. If he were charged as a juvenile, he would have remained behind bars. Daniel then borrowed money from his mother and was able to walk free. And unfortunately, just 1 year after Daniel's release, he would go on to commit one of the worst crimes a human being could commit. After his release, Daniel kept busy by burglarizing home after home, stealing anything valuable, including jewelry and guns. He also would take pointless items and move things around just to freak people out because he really is just a POS. This finally came to an inevitable end on December 1st, 1987, when Daniel would break into the Gustafson residence, where 33-year-old church nursery school teacher Priscilla Gustafson was at home with her two little ones, Abigail, age 7, and William, age 5, while father and husband Andrew Gustafson was at work. Daniel broke into the home still daylight and sadly shot and killed the loving mother, and then proceeded to drown both young children before running off with the stolen goods. Priscilla's loving husband and father would come home horrified by the sight of his wife, and was too terrified to see the condition of his children, and instead ran out of the home and called the police. Daniel would eventually be caught 48 hours later, found hiding in a dumpster where he belongs. Daniel was then charged and found guilty at the age of 18 of the brutal murder of this beautiful, kind family, and is currently serving 3 life sentences for the murder of the Gustafson family. Andrew Gustafson was able to heal with the help and support from friends and loved ones, and although some people think too soon, remarried a year after losing his family and even having 2 daughters with his new wife. Andrew would even go on to make a comment to reporters saying, "When you've gone through this kind of loss, you are just glad the sun is shining every day. Life becomes more precious to you. We didn't want to waste it." Andrew would unfortunately later pass away in 2014 at the age of 60 after losing a long battle with cancer. In 2017, the Supreme Court ruled that juveniles could not be sentenced to life without parole, and during Daniel's appeal, since he was a juvenile at the time, apologized for the first time to the Gustafson family for the horrendous crime he'd committed. However, Daniel showed no emotion at all, and it was clear that his apology was insincere and was manufactured with a selfish motive in mind. Daniel was then resentenced to 3 life sentences with the possibility of parole after serving 45 years, making him eligible for parole in the year 2032. To be fair, I should include that Daniel LaPlante did not have an easy upbringing. He would suffer from many people closest to him and has allegedly suffered traumatic sexual and psychological abuse during his childhood at the hands of his father, and then as a teen at the hands of his psychiatrist. His childhood home was always surrounded by mass junk and old abandoned cars, and never had anyone care for him. And although this makes no excuse for his very evil crimes, it once again shows that there is usually a connection between childhood trauma and the behavior of the person who fell victim to such trauma. This case seems so out there and so strange that many people believe it to be Hollywood. Unfortunately, this case is a true case, and this really did happen, and Daniel LaPlante is very real. I do want to say first, though, that my thoughts and prayers go out to the surviving Gustafson family members. I could not imagine going through a traumatizing event like that one. Even though Daniel LaPlante being in prison the rest of his life may bring some closure and some form of justice to the family, it does not erase the horrendous memories or that the fact that this really did happen. I'd also like to give my thoughts and prayers to the Bowen family. I hope they are healing from the trauma I'm sure Daniel caused by living in their walls and then coming out in their deceased mother's clothes and holding a weapon. I mean, it does seem something like a movie, but unfortunately there are people out there like this. Well, guys, I think this is where we're going to wrap it up. So, please like, comment, and subscribe for more weekly videos, and please give me feedback on what you thought about the story, the case, me, everything. I love feedback from you guys. But until then, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week for a new true crime video.